Chapter 5, The Glorified Body, Metamorphosis of the Body and the Singularity Archetype. And if you look at the screen, I'm going to scroll through the William Blake image called Glad Day in the Dance of Albion. There it is. Painted in approximately 1794. It's in the British Museum in London. The ascending power of the singularity archetype is partly evidenced by our mutating relationship to embodiment. Body image disorders and some other cultural phenomena related to the body may be pathologized expressions of an evolutionary drive. Suffering associated with body image has reached such epidemic proportions in our culture that it must be counted as one of the greatest spiritual plagues ever to be visited upon mankind. Media bombard us unceasingly with images, increasingly digitally enhanced, of ever more idealized youth and beauty, while vast portions of our population undergo voluntary starvation, grueling exercise regimens, and surgeries in an effort to control their body image. Attempts to control body image often result in collapsing self-esteem, intense suffering, and premature death through self-imposed famine. Anorexia, in other words. The temptation is to view body image problems as an isolated illness rather than as a phenomenon that points right to the core of our evolutionary predicament. What from one vantage seems an illness in need of eradication, from another is an evolutionary process in need of understanding and continued transformation. The purpose here is to explore body image problems in their actual context, the spiritual, biological evolution of the species. Viewed from this depth, body image disorders come to seem part of a difficult birthing process. This process involves risk and suffering, but may also result in the creation of new life. The primary cause. From the illness point of view, body image is a problem neither hidden nor unstudied, and in recent decades there's been an explosion of studies, articles, and books which have attempted to understand and ameliorate this collective illness. Eating disorders are the most lethal of psychiatric conditions. Much of the most profound and valuable work on body image eating disorders has been done by feminist historians and psychologists who have conducted incisive studies of how the oppressive force vectors of a patriarchal society, particularly the media, have distorted women's expectations of their bodies. This work is entirely valid as far as it goes, which unfortunately is not to the core of the problem. While the body image epidemic is greatly exacerbated by media and patriarchal forces, it is not entirely reducible to those forces. For example, Jeffrey Kripal, who's hopefully going to write the intro to this book, had a life-threatening case of anorexia when he was an adolescent, which he's discussed publicly many times and written about. What is often perceived by researchers as the cause of the illness is actually a set of pernicious symptoms created by a deeper, more primary cause. Hiding the primary cause of the collective illness are symptoms and secondary forces that are powerful, highly visible, and capable of acting as seemingly independent prime movers. At the true center of the epidemic and its vortex of symptoms is an absolutely primary human urge, which I have termed the will toward the glorified body. This primary cause, unlike the secondary forces mistaken as primary, though they're still highly influential, is a force capable of creating growth and transformation. When we examine the actual core of this problem, we find both the reasons and the means for creating an unexpectedly positive outcome. What is a glorified body? To understand the will toward the glorified body, we first need to define what I am referring to. Okay, let's just call it define it. Many Christian writings describe the body of the resurrected Christ as being a glorified body, a radiant body free of mortal limitations. Although I am not working from a Christian perspective, I believe this phrase captures a powerful archetype. We see images and hear stories of the glorified body in most or all cultures and periods. All sorts of variations and numerous gradations exist on the glorified body spectrum, but the defining characteristics are fairly apparent. Although the glorified body occurs in endless variations, there are two very broad categories in which the term glorified body will be employed here. One use of the glorified body refers to the inherent energy body that all human beings possess. Sometimes I will substitute energy body to make clear this first meaning of glorified body. The second and somewhat overlapping category of use for the term glorified body refers to human or non-human entities whose manifest bodies are closer to energy than conventional flesh and blood bodies. This type of glorified body hovers in the collective psyche of the human species as a highly charged image and expectation of our future evolution. Okay, I just improved that. The definition was not, the second part was incomplete. Glorified body refers to human or non-human entities whose manifest bodies are closer to energy than conventional flesh and blood bodies, or other forms of super bodies such as the super-abled, superhero characters, in other words. This type of glorified body hovers in the collective psyche of the human species as a highly charged image and expectation of our further evolution. Energy bodies. No mystical leap of faith or willing suspension of disbelief is required to accept the reality that we all possess an energy body. This type of glorified body has been recognized by secular and religious traditions throughout human history. Eastern models of the energy body from Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine and Western scientific studies of human energy fields by psychologist and physiologist Valerie Hunt at UCLA are examples of systematic studies of our energetic anatomy. The NIH, the National Institute of Health, officially recognizes the term biofield. Although the intense materialism of our culture has caused us to lose touch with our real nature, in many other cultures and periods, the existence of an energy body in parallel to the flesh and blood body was accepted as a medical everyday fact. Chinese medicine has for thousands of years recognized that we have a body made of qi, or life energy, and that it is composed of an intricate structure of energy meridians. Acupuncture works with virtual points located along these energy meridians that are not in any way discernible in the dense physical body. And there's a footnote there. The existence of biofields has been gaining mainstream acceptance, and I give a government publication referenced it there from the NCBI. Western medicine has gradually come to recognize the validity of acupuncture, though it was yet unable to explain how it works. In other Eastern traditions, the glorified body is referred to as Shakti or Kundalini. In Western occultism, it is referred to variously as the astral body, subtle body, light body, dream body, fine matter body, and etheric body. Soul, psyche, self, mind, ego, and consciousness can all be considered energy bodies or aspects of the glorified body, which physicalist science has failed miserably to locate or explain in terms of the physical body. Parapsychological phenomena are also difficult or impossible to explain in terms of a purely physical body. Physicalist, substituting that word because materialist has a connotation of like consumerism, so we use physicalist instead in the science context, tends to react to such phenomenon with agitation and denial. But these supposedly anomalous phenomena become obvious and expected when we recognize that we have an energy body. William James famously said, "If you wish to upset the law that all crows are black, you mustn't seek to show that no crows are. It is enough to prove one single crow to be white." For example, A single occurrence in all of human history of a mother being able to visualize her child in trouble at a distant location accurately would be sufficient to disprove the notion that we are only physical bodies, and we've had whole flocks of such white crows pass over our heads. As discussed earlier, large numbers of people in different cultures and periods report out-of-body and near-death experiences. OBEs and NDEs involve the experience of consciousness remote from the physical body. Increasingly, these phenomena have been subjected to serious systematic study. As we've discussed, NDE researchers have found that people who are revived from states of arrested bodily function describe strikingly similar life-changing experiences of departing their physical bodies and discovering their awareness existing as an energy body, a glorified body which many described as possessed with extraordinary vitality, capable of seeing and hearing with dazzling acuity, and sometimes able to travel anywhere in space or time at will. Manifesting the glorified body. Although the glorified body may exist in all of us, some people are able to manifest it in different ways and degrees than others. A charismatic person, a person who seems radiant or has a powerful presence, may be better able to manifest their glorified body. There are apparently rare cases of human beings who have shifted their energy body into the foreground of manifestation to such an extent that for a period of time they appear to be closer to light than flesh and blood. For example, there are some rare but well-documented cases of anedia, popularly known as breatharianism, where people are able to remain healthy on little to no nourishment. The glorified body mythologized. In mythologies that range from ancient texts to the latest science fiction, the glorified body appears free of some or all of the many limitations of mortality. The glorified body may be completely free of cosmetic blemishes, limited vitality, aging, pain, disease, and death. A glorified body may be able to transcend conventional limitations of space and time. For example, it may not need technology or an intermediary force of any sort to appear in any location it chooses. It may have transcendent clarity of vision and thought. Often it will transcend ordinary language and communicate through radiance or from the inside of another psyche. A being with a glorified body may live in a state of enlightenment and love, or it could be evil and possess an incredibly potent array of diabolical powers. Visually, a glorified body may appear radiant and beautiful, awe-inspiring, numinous, the body of an angel. But it could also choose to appear cloaked as a mundane physical body, or as a hideous apparition or demon. Some glorified bodies are infinitely plastic, able to take on whatever form is desired. This is the quality of the idioplastic body, the shapeshifter, the changeling, like the devil that hath the power to assume a pleasing shape, or the liquid metal T-1000 Terminator in the movie Terminator 2. In contemporary mythology, the glorified body appears in a spectrum of permutations, ranging from an idealized human material body to a state of omnipotent, omniscient godhood. In our materialist culture, we have Superman, the man of steel, who has a more industrialized version of the glorified body. Superman doesn't have special radiance, telepathy, or most other divine attributes. He does have X-ray vision, perhaps I should have mentioned, but leaps tall buildings in a single bound, outruns locomotives, and most helpful in our culture, is bulletproof. The glorified body also appears as the shape-shifting UFO phenomenon, that's coming in a later chapter, perceived by human observers in endlessly varying forms. People experience extraordinary beings from fairies to Bigfoot, purported aliens, angels, ghosts, and a whole cryptozoology of other entities. An interesting mythological place to observe an evolving spectrum of glorified bodies in contemporary culture is in the rich fantasy world of Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. These novels also have much to say about the intensity of the modern will toward the glorified body. As Rice develops her vision, particular vampires grow more powerful and their bodies become more glorified. Fledgling vampires don't age are stronger than mortals, are more energetic, have superior mental clarity and memory, are superb mimics, communicate telepathically, and have a variety of other paranormal abilities. But Rice's vampires are not without some limits and vulnerabilities. Most of them are dependent on living blood and can be destroyed by fire, sunlight, and older, more powerful vampires. In Rice's canon, vampire bodies go through a kind of reverse aging. They become stronger, more impervious, and develop an array of powers that seem to be evolving toward omnipotence. Significantly, the most advanced vampires are no longer dependent on drinking blood and become increasingly independent of the organic world. I should add oldest. In Rice's mythology, well, that's not true because Lestat the vampire is not super old, but he's drunk the blood of one of the oldest. In Rice's mythology, the first vampire was created when a spirit, driven by jealous discontent at not having a body, was able to enter a human being and merge as a kind of symbiont with body and psyche. In other words, the vampire species began as a hybridization of a spirit, a pure energy body, merging with a physical body. In the fourth book of the Chronicles, the body thief, the vampire Lestat is tempted to trade his glorified vampire body for a mortal one by the body thief, a man of dark psychic gifts who has learned how to transfer his psyche into the body of a vulnerable human being. Lestat agrees to a 3-day exchange of his vampire body for the body of an exceptionally handsome, vital young man. The body thief stole this body so that he could more effectively tempt the narcissistic Lestat. As soon as the exchange is made, Lestat is horrified by the clumsiness of the mortal body, its vulnerability, slowness, limited energy, poor vision, and lack of telepathic abilities. He feels the most extreme revulsion when he has to suffer through eating, digestion, bowel movements, and illness. It takes a desperate struggle for him to regain his glorified body from the duplicitous body thief, and he is never again tempted to experiment with human corporeality. In the Chronicles, you can feel the deep urge in Rice to have a glorified body herself, a body not limited by predetermined gender, unwanted body fat, limited beauty, and power. Through her characters, Rice displays the gifts of a talented body thief in the imaginal realm as she projects her awareness into one glorified body after another. The will toward the glorified body. The human will toward the glorified body is not a subtle urge. It is an iron fist pounding on both sides of the doors of perception. It is an urging of such terrible power that it will prompt some to undergo the surgeon's knife, to go under the surgeon's knife, starve themselves to death, and sell their souls in the hope of having a mortal body that will merely better resemble a glorified body for a brief time. The glorified body is not a casual, imaginative musing or an episodic blip on the radar screens of various cultures. It is a powerful emergent archetype. It is one of our most ancient obsessions and one of the most explosively contemporary. It is related to the deepest sources of human suffering, an inextricable aspect of 1,000 types of neurotic torment, a companion in some way to almost every form of personal hell. It is also a divine muse, one of the greatest sources of hope and inspiration we've ever known. Messages about the will toward a glorified body are as ubiquitous in our culture as Wi-Fi and cell phone signals. Expressions of this will are deeply embedded in every religion and mythology, and yet it is rarely named, rarely seen as a highly defined, differentiated, and absolutely integral part of human psychology. The will toward the differentiated might be a little redundant. Let's get rid of it. The will toward the glorified body is at the center of some of our most destructive and creative impulses. This will is a primary urge that can inspire incredible athletic achievement, great art, and technology that blurs with magic. The will toward the glorified body is what inspired Michelangelo to carve David. This same will has also inspired the technological magicians of the computer industry to provide us with avatars, animated characters that personify us in the once visually anonymous world of the early internet. In various virtual environments, we can slip on glorified bodies and revel in a digital garden of unearthly delights. Our, our avatar bodies are infinitely plastic, and with mouse clicks, we can be leaner than a supermodel or more muscular than any bodybuilder. It's interesting to note the term the computer industry has adopted for these new digital bodies: avatars. The first definition of avatar in the abridged Oxford Dictionary is, in Hindu mythology, the descent of a deity or a released soul to earth in bodily form. But somewhere behind the ever more glowing computer monitor or virtual reality goggles will be a human being, a digitally unenhanced mortal corporeal version 1.0, who will very likely have bags under their eyes and a weight problem. The Wizard of Oz tells us not to look at the man behind the curtain, but we will look and will be ever more horrified with the contrast between what we see behind the curtain and what's up there on the screen. The primary urge remains agonizingly unfulfilled. However unfulfilling it may be in some ways, technology is one of the central expressions of the will toward a glorified body. Technology actually does allow us to extend our physical bodies through time and space. The urge to become a celebrity, for example, is an urge toward a glorified body that modern technology can, to some degree, create. In her films, Marilyn Monroe still lives as a youthful beauty. Since she died young, there is no aging mortal body to provide an embarrassing contrast to her glorified body projected on the silver screen. Her life fulfills the Blondie song, "Die Young, Stay Pretty." Here are a few of the lyrics. Die young, stay pretty. Love for youth, so die young and stay pretty. Technology can actually allow you to die young and stay pretty. Marilyn has been dead for half a century, but she remains a goddess. People in our culture perceive that someone like Marilyn Monroe has achieved a kind of technological glorified body and seek material technological means to achieve immortality themselves. I guess that should be more than half a century. Major Hollywood stars are increasingly using high-fidelity digital capture to create digital twins or AI avatars for future commercial and creative use. This process, often referred to as future-proofing, allows actors to license their likenesses for projects they do not physically attend or to portray themselves at different ages. Attempting to glorify the mortal body. Projecting the image of a glorified body is much more difficult, however, for human beings who don't live on the silver screen and instead are subject to the embarrassment of having an organic, mortal body visible to others in real time without digital enhancement. Most people don't possess unusual physical beauty, or if they do presently, may have problems if they plan to live a normal lifespan. Many in our culture tried to glorify their mortal bodies through dieting, cosmetic surgery, and exercise regimens. But attempts to whip the mortal body into glorified body status can never result in a lasting feeling of success. There is always that person on the screen who looks better and seems to really have a glorified body. Projection of the glorified body onto the idealized other makes him or her light up like a god, a being impervious to the blemishes of mortality. And I've got to insert here. Okay, I hope I'm picking up at the right point. But a projection of the glorified body onto the idealized other makes him or her light up like a god, a being impervious to the blemishes of mortality. So if you go on the screen, you'll see the URL to something I wrote that's extremely relevant called Beauty in the Eyes of the Phase Shifter. Many people are secretly fascinated and delighted when a beautiful celebrity is revealed in a People magazine photo to have gained weight, aged, or otherwise fallen from the projected glory of Mount Olympus to the mortal gutter. A common form of clickbait that functions as revenge porn advertises such and such a celebrity now unrecognizable. Let's put an exclamation point there. When many people see a glowingly beautiful person, they don't realize they are seeing a changing mortal body in a temporary condition of beauty. Every supermodel is aging and hurtling toward death with the rest of us. For many, beautiful people, particularly celebrity beauties, are members of a fundamentally different caste than mortal appearing humans. These hot people light up in our minds with the sacred fire of deep sexual longing. As we behold them, we may feel the stirrings of immortal archetypal forces. It may seem as if they were a race of gods and a race of mortals, as if there were a race of gods and a race of mortals inhabiting the same planet. Nietzsche's Zarathustra said, "If there are gods, how can I stand it to be no god?" In our culture, we say, "If there are beautiful people, how can I stand it to be no beautiful person?" Mortal body identification and meat puppet despair. One of the great causes of despair and suffering in modern society is our tendency to identify exclusively with the mortal body. The intense materialistic bias of our culture has caused many of us to forget that we also have a glorified body, an energy or spirit body that religious and secular traditions from all cultures and periods have recognized. Even physicalist science recognizes that viewing a human being as an object is a fallacy. A body is not a fixed object, but a process. Tens of trillions of cellular organisms, each changing nanosecond by nanosecond, work cooperatively to create a human body. The mortal body has been called spiritualized tissue, and physicalist science has failed to explain the connection between mind and brain. Over the past half-century, confidence in strictly reductive physicalist accounts of mind has not been questioned, Over the past half-century, confidence in strictly reductive physicalist accounts of mind has become increasingly strained by converging lines of philosophical analysis, empirical anomaly, and unresolved explanatory gaps. The persistence of the hard problem of consciousness, the interpretive ambiguities within quantum theory, and the growing body of rigorously studied anomalous experience together suggest that a purely material-based ontology may be conceptually insufficient to account for the full range of observed phenomena. While physicalism remains the dominant working assumption of contemporary science, its more reductionist forms appear to require ever more speculative auxiliary hypotheses in order to preserve explanatory closure. In this context, a bit of philosophically dense prose there, In this context, a widening circle of philosophers, scientists, and clinicians has begun to explore alternative metaphysical frameworks, variously described as non-reductive, dual aspect, panpsychist, or idealist, not as articles of faith, but as provisional attempts to restore coherence between lived experience, empirical data, and theoretical understanding. The emerging shift is therefore less a rejection of science than a deepening of its ontological horizon, an acknowledgement that mind may not be a late and local byproduct of matter, but a fundamental feature of reality whose full implications remain only dimly understood. If reductive accounts of mind no longer command unquestioned confidence, the resulting space is not merely theoretical but imaginal. Human cultures do not respond to ontological uncertainty with abstraction alone. They generate symbols capable of holding what thought cannot yet resolve. Fell into a semicolon there. I hate semicolons. Sorry. Okay. Across religions, mythologies, and now technological futures, one image occurs with striking persistence: the transformation or transfiguration of the mortal body into a more luminous, liberated, or enduring form. What philosophy approaches as the inadequacy of matter-only explanation, the psyche encounters as the intuition of a deeper embodiment. The archetype of the glorified body can therefore be understood not as fantasy or prophecy, but as a symbolic response to a genuine tension within modern consciousness, a way of imagining the reconciliation of matter and mind at the very threshold where their apparent division begins to fail. But does the physicalist bias of many scientists have any cultural effect? For example, on a teenager with a body image problem? Years ago, when I was a teacher in an alternative school for troubled adolescents, I was asked to work with a 15-year-old boy, we'll call him Adam, whom other staff found impossible to work with. Adam was depressed and reported suicidal ideation. Though notably good-looking, he had body dysphoria and saw human existence as painful and futile. One day, as we talked about the source of his despair, Adam mentioned a television program he had seen a few years earlier, a documentary showing brain surgery performed on a patient with epilepsy. During the operation, and there are no nerve receptors in the brain, the neurosurgeon stimulated regions of the exposed brain, observing the responses and labeled each area accordingly. Adam was horrified by the television documentary. Being human seemed reducible to a brain that was nothing more than a circuit board. He felt that this show proved that he was nothing more than a meat puppet, a term he borrowed from the name of a popular punk band. Adam's feelings about his own body and human existence were influenced by the briefest glimpse of the pseudo-scientific position referred to as neurological materialism, the belief that human consciousness is non-existent or is reducible to an epiphenomenal byproduct of chemical process in the brain. But we are not meat puppets. We are much more than our mortal bodies, and we already possess a glorified body. The priests of scientism have influenced the rest of society toward the painful delusion of physicalism. They adamantly deny spirit, soul, and our most fundamental attribute, consciousness, which they claim is purely an illusion arising from biochemical processes in the brain. The high priest of neurological materialism is the late Daniel Dennett, who in his book Consciousness Explained famously said, "We are all zombies. Nobody is conscious." Dennett ignorantly purported his idea of eliminative materialism, that once we fully explain the physical functions of the brain, there will be nothing else to explain. This is called promissory physicalism. We'll eventually explain it. Consciousness as a separate non-physical thing is an illusion created by the brain's internal, in quotes, user interface. In other words, Dennett and his ilk want to stop us from anthropomorphizing people. There are other high priests of physicalism who evangelize their misanthropic and nihilistic disenchantment of the cosmos. Cosmically, we are no more significant than mold on a shower curtain, said British-born astrophysicist and science writer David Lindley. I believe that when I die, I shall rot, and nothing of my ego will survive. Bertrand Russell said that. Regrettable statement. Richard Dawkins often refers to the universe as having no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. Stephen Hawking referred to the human race as, quote, just a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet, unquote. These thinkers are overcorrecting for the many abuses of religion and other forms of dogmatic irrational belief, but they fall into enantiodromia, a swing to the opposite pole that actively disenchants the world and does violence to the meaningfulness of human existence. The delusion of physicalism causes people to anxiously perceive the body, our body, and the body of the other as both objects and the totality of an empty state of being. And some of the evidence against the physicalist view of the body is right there in the near-death experience chapter we already covered. The ghost in the machine. Our glorified body has become the ghost in the machine, an elusive suspect dimension that can't be measured in grams, centimeters, or amperes. Physicalist science, so far unable within its prevailing paradigms to solve the hard problem of consciousness, tends to minimize, eliminate as illusion, or otherwise reduce and redefine consciousness rather than admit that there may be more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in its dismal collection of ruling assumptions. Once patriarchy declared man made in the image of God, now scientist declares that man is made in the image of the machine. But there is empirical research of many sorts that strongly suggests that consciousness is not a mechanism and can decouple from brain function in certain conditions. Terminal lucidity. Terminal lucidity, the unexpected return of mental clarity, memory, and coherent personality shortly before death in patients with severe dementia or brain injury, has increasingly drawn serious clinical and scholarly attention. Carefully documented cases describe individuals who, after years of profound cognitive deterioration seemingly explained by irreversible neural damage, briefly recover recognizable identity, meaningful communication, and emotional presence in the final hours or days of life when their neural function would ordinarily be expected to be profoundly diminished. That's kind of weak. How about in its worst state? Terminal lucidity cases have been reported across cultures, medical settings, and historical periods, and are hard to dismiss as mere anecdote or wishful interpretation. Terminal lucidity strongly suggests a transcendent dimension of consciousness capable of recovery and expansion even when ordinary brain function is profoundly suppressed by neural illness, and as we'll see in the next section, under the influence of certain psychedelic substances. Functional MRI studies of brain activity during psilocybin and LSD experiences. Neuroimaging research on psychedelic states has introduced a related line of evidence that further complicates strictly reductive accounts of mind. Functional MRI and related techniques consistently show that substances such as LSD and psilocybin do not simply stimulate the brain into hyperactivity, as might be expected if intensified experience required increased neural production. Instead, many studies report reduced activity and decreased functional connectivity within key high-level networks, particularly the default mode network associated with self-referential processing and narrative identity, even as subjects describe experiences of heightened clarity, unity, meaning, and expanded awareness. This counterintuitive pattern, diminished organized brain activity, accompanying intensified conscious experience, has led some researchers to propose that the brain may function less as a generator of consciousness than as a filter, limiter, or modulator of a more fundamental field of awareness. Psychedelic neuroscience joins terminal lucidity and near-death research in suggesting that the relationship between brain activity and conscious presence may be more complex and potentially more transcendent than classic neurological materialism has assumed possible. These converging lines of evidence can be situated within a long-standing philosophical debate about the relationship between brain and mind. In a production model still dominant within neurological materialism, conscious experience is generated entirely by neural activity, much as sound is produced by a vibrating instrument. Damage to the instrument should therefore eliminate the music. By contrast, damage to the instrument should therefore eliminate the music. By contrast, filter or transmission models proposed in different forms by thinkers from William James and Henry Bergson to several contemporary philosophers of mind suggest that the brain may instead constrain, shape, or mediate a more fundamental field of consciousness, analogous to a receiver that limits rather than creates the signal it expresses. Like you break a television, but the television broadcast doesn't go away. You break your computer, the internet doesn't go away, but you just lose access to it in that one local circumstance. Within such frameworks, phenomena like terminal lucidity, near-death experience, and the paradoxical neural quieting observed in psychedelic states no longer appear as anomalies to be dismissed, but as boundary events that illuminate the possibility that consciousness exceeds the structure through which it is ordinarily expressed. Ray Kurzweil, Transcendent Man? Ray Kurzweil is a neurological materialist and technology futurist who has written a number of influential books, including The Age of Spiritual Machines and The Singularity is Near. A documentary about him. Okay. All right, maybe I don't need a comma there. About him, Transcendent Man, confirmed my impression of him as a tragicomic. Confirmed my impression of him as a tragic comic figure, desperately trying to keep his aging body alive by taking 100 supplements a day so that he can be around for a kind of technological rapture, he imagines. In a surreal rant I wrote about aging, I described his absurd predicament. You can see the article there in the footnote. Of course, if you are a fundamentalist materialist and a technological futurist like Ray Kurzweil, then you may have some expectation of having your consciousness downloaded into a quantum computer housed in a titanium alloy exoskeleton with Zeiss optics and a shape-shifting dermal layer consisting of nanobots able to reconfigure themselves in any way that is consistent with the underlying titanium exoskeleton. In other words, your expectation is the nerdy gadget version of being an immortal changeling. But no matter how many off-planet backups of yourself you have downloaded into quantum computers kept in no matter how many off-planet backups of yourself you have downloaded into quantum computers kept in supercooled, fully hardened underground bunkers, there is always the possibility of a superwave or galaxy-devouring black hole destroying all those backups. This is what Tolkien called premature immortality, the naive confusion of immortality with being in a single age-resistant body. If only someone could point this high IQ but clueless man toward NDE research, which ought to show him essential flaws in neurological materialism and allow him to realize that neither bodies nor machinery are necessary for the survival of consciousness. Kurzweil's vision is not merely an eccentric personal project, however, but a neurological materialist's naive expression of the ancient human longing for a glorified, deathless body. Okay, this should be called Awakening from Physicalism. All right. Confidence in strictly reductive physicalism is weakening in parts of philosophy of mind and theoretical science, especially around the problem of consciousness. No physicalist is able to match Bernardo Kastrup, who has PhDs in both computer science and analytical philosophy, in a debate. A significant minority of scientists have begun to integrate the findings of quantum mechanics and have stopped denying the existence of phenomena that physicalism finds impossible to explain. Still, we must be cautious because although quantum mechanics has profound implications, we can't be cavalier about applying them to human reality. Quantum mechanics applies to the subatomic domain and is comprehensible in the language of mathematics, not English, so I don't want to fall into the New Age tendency to use quantum mechanics as an endless supply of fairy dust that can be used to justify any proposition. Anything I say about quantum mechanics should be regarded as speculation, but there are far better qualified voices making similar points. Bernard d'Espagnier, maybe mispronouncing his name, Templeton-winning quantum physicist, wrote that the doctrine that the world exists independent of consciousness conflicts with quantum mechanics and experiment. Quantum theorist Henry Stapp claims that conscious minds select among quantum possibilities, and wave function collapse occurs when interacting with consciousness. Some contemporary quantum foundations researchers and philosophers argue that consciousness may be fundamental and that physical reality is not fully independent of it. The photon has been called a wavicle because it can appear experimentally as either a particle or wave, depending on the measurement context. Metaphorically applying this wavicle paradox to people, if you view a human being as an object, a particle, then you experience the mortal physical body as all there is and will tend toward the meat puppet view of neurological materialism. If you view a human being as a soul, then you experience the wave-like spirit body and will tend toward a mystical religious point of view. I'll let another semicolon creep in. To see the full human being, you need to merge these points of view until you can experience that human beings are both particle-like physical bodies and wave-like energy bodies. Sorry, I keep dropping my overly physical mouse. Physicalist neuroscience joins and suggests the relationship between brain activity and conscious presence may be more complex and potentially more transcendent than classical neurological materialism has assumed possible. Oops, we're in the totally wrong place. I might have said this already. If you view a human being as a soul, then you experience the wave-like spirit body and will tend toward a mystical religious point of view. To see the full human being, you need to merge these points of view until you can experience that human beings are both particle-like physical bodies and wave-like energy bodies. The dualistic point of view formalized by Descartes at the dawn of science caused mind and body to be sundered into entirely separate realms. But that naive separation is failing both in science and society. Increasingly, a regained awareness is dawning in the West that body and mind are two sides of the same coin, and that spirit and body have an inherent integration captured by the alchemical principle, as above, so below. Let's add a paragraph break. The glorified body is an energy body that is still physical, though presently more difficult for our instrumentation to detect or describe. Classical Newtonian physics and the physicalist paradigm failed to explain consciousness and other aspects of the glorified body, but contemporary physicists like Roger Penrose, Dana Zohar, Amit Goswami, and Fred Alan Wolf have proposed quantum mechanical models of the human organism that account for both body and consciousness. This generation gap is even wider in society, where many ordinary persons, like my 15-year-old former student Adam, believe that science has proven that we are meat puppets and that there is no spirit or energy body, and others who know the facts of life, recognized by almost every other culture in history, that we have both physical and energetic bodies. Reflection versus radiance. A large part of our suffering is caused by our tendency to mistake reflection for radiance. Our materialist bias causes us to equate ourselves and others with reflections. Mirrors, photographs, film, and video obviously present us with mere reflections of human beings, but directly gazing at a real-time human body passing us on the sidewalk can also be a case of seeing a mirror reflection. What we actually see is the reflection of ambient light off the surface topography of skin, hair, and clothing. This reflection enters the simple convex lens of the cornea and emerges upside down on the back of the retina. I don't think we need the word turn there. The retina also has a large blind spot where the optic nerve connects. This imperfectly transmitted light must be turned right side up. The blind spot must be filled in. The brain will just guess what should be there. And in numerous other ways, the registered image must be interpreted by neurological processing. This doesn't happen instantaneously. A time buffer exists between environmental phenomenon and our perception. Let's make that visual perception for clarity. What we actually see is a neurological reconstruction of a past event. Fortunately, we don't perceive with just the conventional 5 bodily senses. Other persons have radiance, the direct transmission of self that allows us to feel their presence at a distance, which precludes ordinary sense perception. What we perceive may be more like an overlay of reflection, a neurological construct, and radiance, direct perception of the other's self. A person with the looks to create a beautiful topographical reflection might have a radiance that is sickening to behold. You see reflections, you behold radiance. We would ease a great deal of suffering if we could shift the ratio between seeing and beholding when we perceive ourselves and others. If we learn to behold others as radiance, to look beyond the blemishes of their reflection, to perceive the glorified body already present, then we will have gone a long way toward transforming our relationship to others and to ourselves when we look in the mirror, from what Martin Buber called an I-it perception to a more soulful I-thou relationship. To accomplish that transformation, we need to name and recognize the perception of radiance we already have. We also need to shift the radiance of reflection and radiance in our perception to favor radiance. The 60s and the glorified body. The 60s rebellion from the dense, naive materialism of the 50s was in many ways a reassertion of the glorified body. Consciousness-altering psychedelic experiences were sought as out-of-body experiences on demand. The fascination with Eastern religion, transcendental meditation, parapsychology, and the occult was largely a rebellion against the patriarchal dogma that the material body was all that existed. But if we add physical objects. Of course, the rebellion included a lot of narcissistic goofiness, crass commercialism, plus the gullibility and ineffectuality often associated with the New Age. Terence McKenna defined New Age as being willing to try anything so long as it didn't work. More sympathetically, there was still an authentic effort to compensate for the collective dissatisfaction with the reigning creed of materialism. Body image and eating disorders are largely pernicious symptoms of this reigning materialism and its tendency to create an exclusive identification with the physical body that is both painful and highly disorienting. We need to heal that disorientation and expand our identification with the physical body to include recognition of our inherent glorified body. A primary urge. The will toward a glorified body is a primary urge for our entire species, and not just single individuals living in a particular culture. Organisms of all sorts seem to have the primary urge to reproduce, to propagate genetically. Among gendered organisms, there is an insistent urge to couple with other individuals of the same species. That urging may be intense enough to be described as going into heat. Heat is a state of increased excitation and dynamism, whether it is the material heat of fire or the metabolic heat of a living organism. Why don't we make that of a sexually excited living organism for clarity? You're seeing real-time editing. The organism in heat may appear agitated, even tormented. Instead of organism, how about animal? It's not bacteria. I don't have it, I don't think. even tormented while in the grip of this urge. In the adolescent stage of development, the stage of recently acquired reproductive potential, there may be a particularly urgent will to achieve that first coupling. The unfulfilled, losing your virginity, in other words, the unfulfilled urge is antecedent to the coupling event, an event that in chaos math is called an attractor. Very likely, the organism will get to fulfill this urge, but it's not a sure thing. Some folks die virgins. Some organisms may die before they fulfill the urge, but some individuals of that species must succeed in fulfilling that urge, or the species will become extinct, unless they all revert to in vitro fertilization, I guess. As far as I can tell, urges in nature are always fulfilled by a species, though not necessarily by every individual of that species. Only in human beings could we even imagine the existence of an urge that seems never to be fulfilled. My intuition is that the human species has gone into heat, a state of heightened expectation, agitation, and chaos. My speculation is that we are nearing the attractor, where we can couple with the glorified body in a way that releases us from the oppressive limits of corporeality and fulfills a primary urge. Certainly some degree of that is progressively at work with all our technological augmentations. Meanwhile, from a different direction, the findings of near-death experience research, parapsychology, and a number of other fields are quietly creating a new Copernican revolution. The disenchanting delusions of materialism, which put the wetware, let's change that to physicalism, which put the wetware of a single corporeal body at the center of existence, are giving way to a recognition that we are much more than that. Instead of viewing consciousness as a byproduct or illusion generated by the body, we are becoming aware that bodies are more like planets, orbiting the radiance of the psyche. The intensifying will toward the glorified body is happening at a time of evolutionary crisis when the metabolism of the whole species is heating up. Technological changes and scientific discoveries are fundamentally altering our experiences of self and outer reality. The biosphere that allows the existence of our physical bodies has undergone a global toxification, which is threatening the continuance of our species. By the way, I missed a stranded footnote to explain that I'm using attractor. Roughly an attractor, it's from chaos math, is a state toward which dynamic systems tend to evolve. Here it's used metaphorically, like Terence used it, as a future event so powerful it warps causality and phenomena in the present. So the biosphere that allows the existence of our physical bodies has undergone a global toxification, which is threatening the continuance of our species. To understand the body image plague, we must view it in the context in which it occurs, a crisis phase of human evolution. Many attributes of the human psyche, from sexuality and body image to spirituality and our sense of relation to the universe, are rapidly mutating. We cannot comprehend symptoms without understanding the general condition of a species that is hurtling toward an evolutionary nexus charged with images of extinction and rebirth. Our intensifying will toward the glorified body is more than an urge to reconnect with the inherent human energy body recognized by all human cultures. It is also a pervasive human urge to make a quantum evolutionary jump toward the glorified body as our embodied manifestation. We are experiencing an urge to massively redefine body, self, and our relationship to physical reality. Epilogue. We finally made it. The origins of this chapter on the glorified body are interesting and may have something to add to the content. On May 31st, 31 of 1996, the date is easy to establish because it happened to be the day that Timothy Leary died, I woke up feeling downcast about certain stuck neurotic aspects of my personality, some of which was related to, body image dysphoria and stuff I've been talking about. Feeling no particular inspiration, I decided to sit down with a notebook and a pen in front of me and take another try at understanding anyway. Suddenly, um, what felt energetically like a transmission occurred. And in a short period of time, this seems to be a pattern for me, the time interval always seems less than 40 minutes. It started when I was 19. It's kind of like sudden cascade of insights. An intense series of life-changing insights cascaded through my mind. Was this a last message from Timothy as he left his body? The insights I had about the nature of body and consciousness and a largely unrecognized will in the human species did not merely change my thinking and philosophy, they profoundly shifted some of the most overdetermined, stubbornly neurotic aspects of my personality. I've been a different person ever since that morning, with a permanent reduction of suffering. Just when I finished furiously scribbling down this compressed burst of insight, my pager went off, 1996. This could be the most mundane of events, but intuitively I was absolutely convinced that the pager was registering a parallel transmission and that whoever was calling had something of immediate bearing on the burst of insight. I left my RV to look for a phone. There was a voice message from my friend Jordy saying he needed to talk to me, but the number left on the pager turned out to be that of a hospital in Louisiana. Alarmingly. I should put the word alarmingly in there. Another page came through from him, again with the number of the hospital in Louisiana, and I worried that there might be a medical emergency involving him or his partner, Sarah. I'll cut through the details here. Suffice to say, there was a series of telecommunication anomalies of different sorts, 5 inexplicable malfunctions of different systems, making it impossible for us to communicate. It took more than 24 hours with both of us trying before we could have a live phone contact. Jordy had paged me immediately upon awakening from a dream of shocking intensity and import, in which I appeared as a dream character. The dream's content had jaw-dropping parallelism to the transmission-like burst of insights I had received at the same time Jordy was having his dream. Put that in italics. In the dream, I am standing with Jordy and some of our other friends in the desert near Big Mountain, Arizona. In the waking life, we had all been there doing volunteer work on a Navajo reservation, staying with the family of a medicine man. Our time there, in the spring of 1996, corresponded with the appearance of Comet Hyakutake, the brightest comet in the last several hundred years. Hyakutake, maybe. The reservation, which was in a high desert with few electric lights, had ideal viewing conditions. We see some shooting stars. One of the shooting stars veers off its expected downward trajectory and comes shooting toward us. It appears before us as a glowing, impossibly geometric, Jordy's phrase. He compared it to an M.C. Escher design. It seemed magical, Merkaba-like, interdimensional and alchemical. I turn to Jordy and say, "We finally made it." Upon interpretation, the dream seems to be about our coupling with the glorified body. The star that appears before us is a cosmic vessel like the shape-shifting luminous craft of the UFO phenomenon. The key statement, "we finally made it," seems to have at least 3 levels of meaning. The first is the sense of victory, rescue, and accomplishment after a long travail. We don't need to go there. The second is made it in the sense of manifestation, manufacture, or creation. We finally manifested it. And the third, from the American vernacular, is that we finally coupled with it. This third layer is interesting because of its sexual resonance and the implication of achieving a sexual union that was a long time coming. For example, if a high school boy spoke of his girlfriend and said, "We finally made it," it would be understood to mean that after, let's put an exclamation mark in there. It would be understood to mean that after a long period of frustrated desire and working toward greater intimacy, they finally had sexual intercourse. This layer resonates with the realization I had that morning that our will toward the glorified body was destined to be fulfilled, and that it was a core intentionality like sexual desire. And that's the end of this chapter.